Greetings, good people of the vinyl community on the internet. Welcome to our YouTube channel. This is Wax and Relax Vinyl Listening Room. My name's John, and today we're looking at 50 years ago today, the music of 1974. We're coming down to the end of 2024 with just a few weeks left, so I only had a couple of weeks to get this one done. It's been a little bit since I had anything posted. As you may recall from my last video, if both of you have been watching, we got hit with some storms. We got some major hurricane action down here in Florida, and in our area, we were hit with them, I think 9 days apart. The first one was a flood event because of the storm surge, and the second one was definitely a wind event. So, as we were recovering from one, we got hit with another one, and I happen to be in the insurance business, so it has been a miserable 8 weeks since all of that has happened. So it's even in my own studio here. You may recall from the last video that we filmed the night. I think it was the night of the hurricane. You could see the sandbags piled up here and all that type of thing. We did get some water, and I actually worked from this room because our office had no electricity. So I worked from this room for a couple of days in a wet room. We had a couple of inches of water come in through the back as wind-driven rain, and it's still kind of damp and musky in here, or musty. But I did get a dehumidifier, and that's been running constantly for the last several weeks, and just emptied it just before we did the show. And so we're going to get into the music now that we're up and running and ready to talk about vinyl records. By the way, in that last video, I explained how I had my records raised. It worked. They didn't get damaged. They didn't get flooded. So I'm a happy boy. All right. So I'm going to do 10 records from 1974 that I loved, that I have in my collection, that they're not the best. They're just my favorites. And then I'll have a couple of other auxiliary stuff at the end. And we'll get to that shortly. But in no particular order, one of my favorites, David Bowie, Diamond Dogs. This is a reissue, gatefold, again with the cool old RCA logo that looks, it looks like the old RCA logos, but it actually says Bowie. Right in that prime era of Bowie in his Ziggy phase. There's a section on here. It is the last 3 tracks on side 1, which would be the middle 3 tracks: Sweet Thing, Candidate, and then Sweet Thing Reprise. Out of all the Bowie pieces, that is my favorite section of Bowie music. So definitely hitting there. Next up, we're going to talk about Kiss, Hotter Than Hell. Interesting year in that it was their first year as recording artists, and they did do 2 records this year. While the first one is always going to be near and dear to my heart, this is where they kind of locked into a little bit heavier feel. A lot of that had to do with tape speed in the production section of it, but I think that the kind of the murky, ominous production of this just kind of gives it a lot more character. First record was always a little dry to me, but not nearly as bad as Dressed to Kill would be in 1975, but we'll talk about that in the next one. But yeah, Hotter Than Hell, we didn't know what to make of it because it had the Japanese writing on it, and just, it was so confusing. I mean, 1974, I was 5 years old. I got this in first grade, so I was 6 when I first learned about Kiss, and this was one of the vehicles that did it. Next up, one of my all-time favorites, Steely Dan, Pretzel Logic. Some hit activity here. Starts out with Ricky Don't Lose That Number, which is definitely that little bass riff that he stole from Horace Silver. Nothing else here really hit as a single, but a lot of these would resurface when they started touring again later in the 90s and 2000s. But yeah, good stuff. an end of an era as well, because from here they're going to get into the Michael McDonald era and give birth to yacht rock. Number 4, On the Beach, Neil Young. I've been a Neil Young fan since I was real little. However, this was a late in life discovery for me. It was as I started filling out the catalog that I discovered this. And man, what cool stuff that I missed. It's really taps into a lot of stuff that's happening at the time. There is a very not so veiled reference to Charles Manson on one of the tracks there. You'll have to give it a listen and figure it out for yourself. This one was massive in my household. My older brothers and sisters came home with Lou Reed, Rock and Roll Animal, and it became a food group for sure. The intro alone, the intro to Sweet Jane, I've always felt should be a rock and roll college course. This is where he had finished with the Digital Underground, Velvet Underground, and started working with Bob Ezrin as his producer. And Bob brought in these studio guys that became his touring band, and that would have been Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter, Panty Glenn, and Breakish John. And man, what a hot freaking band. They take these songs to a totally different level. And the problem there was Lou wasn't really happy about getting outshined. So right after all this was done, he ditched them and started a new band. And those guys went on to have massive success as the band for Alice Cooper when he went solo with Welcome to My Nightmare. But later on in life, I became friends with Dick Wagner. He was on my internet radio show, and we ran into him at one of the guitar shops here in town when he was coming through promoting his book. So he's missed. He had a tough go of it at the end of his life, but great guitar player, great composer, really good producer, and important guy for especially in the 70s. I mean, he was all over this record too, from 1974. This is not on the list, but I pulled it because Dick Wagner's on it. Again, Bob Ezrin and all his production cronies in New York City, bringing in all the players, and they're having a hard time getting some things down on Train Kept Rollin' and a couple of other things. So they brought in Dick Wagner, and he played on Get Your Wings. But on this record, this was recorded at Stein's Academy of Music. That's the first half of the concert. A couple of months later, they issued the second half of it in 1975. They called it Lou Reed Live. And if you play them together, that's the whole concert. But pretty cool stuff. Also from New York, 1974. The second and final album of the original New York Dolls. They were just trouble from the word go. Just an absolute mess. And they made really, really wonderful Stones-inspired bluesy, punkish gutter rock and roll. People hated it when they heard it. They never grew to the heights that they should have. But man, listening to these records, it's delicious. It's just, it's just what you wanted. You just didn't know it at the time. Great stuff. And oh, by the way, other than David Johansen, everyone else on this record is dead. That's going to start happening a lot for these records from the 70s. I think people might be surprised that this shows up on my list, but for sure one of my favorite artists, and definitely my favorite from his catalog, John Denver. Back Home Again. Just the title track is my favorite John Denver tune. Great lyricist. As a guy I'm really into bluegrass and Americana and acoustic music, and it's just a lot of that comes from here. Yeah, he was doing it before anyone else. Not anyone else, but he was the guy that bought it mainstream for sure. Um, you'll probably see some more John Denver somewhere on some of my videos. Well, being from Florida, can't forget this one. 1974 offering from Lynyrd Skynyrd, as John Lennon would say. This is Second Helping. First album had Freebird on it. This was the one that starts off with Sweet Home Alabama. Um, you know, a lot of great stuff on here. Ballad of Curtis Lowe, The Needle and the Spoon, the J.J. Cale cover, Call Me the Breeze. They were just a band firing on all cylinders in those early years and just put out great records. I don't care, if you're sick of it, because I could really go the rest of my life without hearing Sweet Home Alabama again. But those records are fabulous. In fact, my first real rock concert was the Rossington Collins Band, which basically was Lynyrd Skynyrd without Ronnie and without Steve Gaines. It was pretty cool when they did Freebird. It put a spotlight on the microphone and brought a hat out. Just put the hat on there. Did it instrumental, and the crowd sang along. It was pretty cool. All right, number 9. Tom Waits, The Heart of Saturday Night. I learned about Tom Waits when I worked at Bananas Records in St. Petersburg, and there was a guy there that was very, very into Tom Waits and would play all the time as we were closing up and counting the register and all that. And I'm like, this guy sounds like Ralph the dog from the Muppets. And apparently, Tom Waits was the inspiration for Ralph the dog from the Muppets. And as I started listening to it lyrically, just able to paint pictures of these characters from the streets. You see them in movies, but you don't really know them. But you listen to a Tom Waits record, you get to know the hookers and the late night waitresses and the drunks and the and the dealers and whatnot. Pretty cool stuff. Number 10. This is gonna finish up my list of my favorite records from '74. You'll find that I'm a very, very big Badfinger fan. In fact, thoughts and prayers going out to Joey Molland right now. He's the last surviving member of the original, most well-known lineup of Badfinger, and it's not looking good. It kind of looks like he should be leaving us soon. I hope not. I was actually supposed to see him at a show a couple of weeks ago, and he wasn't there. So it was a Beatles tribute with Christopher Cross and the guy from the bass player from Chicago, Jason Chef or something like that. Robin Zander from Cheap Trick was there. Maxi Priest, oddly enough, great singer for that type of stuff, even though he's a reggae artist. Who else was there? Henry Gross from Sha Na Na and had that song Shannon, which might have even been 74 or 75, somewhere like that. But yeah, very, very cool show. But David Pack from Ambrosia didn't show, and Joey Molland didn't show. But there's Joey right there on the cover of Wish You Were Here. This was the era of Badfinger where they got their start on Apple Records with the Beatles. McCartney wrote "Come and Get It," and they had a couple of big hits on the No Dice and Straight Up records. Then they got into bad management situation, changed record labels. They had the last album for Apple came out, and they'd already recorded their first album for Warner Brothers, which was this. And so, as Warner Brothers released this, Apple released Ass, and both records pretty much canceled each other out. Nothing happening on the charts, so they go back in to record Wish You Were Here. There's a problem with where the money is. The manager is an ass and stole the money and blah, blah, blah. So because the money is missing, Warner Brothers pulls this off the shelf. So there's not too many of these floating around out there, but they can be found. And that was pretty much the end of a great career, because not long after that, Pete Ham took his life. And then a couple of years later, 83 or so, Tommy Evans took his life. The drummer, Mike Gibbons, lived down here in Florida for a while, and he passed a couple of years ago. And then, as I mentioned, Joey's not in the best of health, but big Badfinger fan, and couldn't have this list without them. A couple of surprise misses for the year of 1974, 50 years ago. As big of a Stones fan as I am, this didn't make it. It's Only Rock and Roll. Good album, not a great album, but a good album. A lot of key Stones moments there. It is the last record with Mick Taylor, so that kind of closes out what they call the golden age or whatever of the Stones. That would be going from Beggar's Banquet to Let It Bleed to Sticky Fingers, Goat's Head Soup, and then closing out with It's Only Rock and Roll. Did I mention Exile on Main Street? I think I did. But yeah, that was kind of the golden era. Then they were off for a little bit, came back with Ronnie Wood and did shit. Why can't I think of anything tonight? Black and Blue, and the rest is history. 74. 3 of the Beatles put out records that year. You had Harrison with Dark Horse. You had Lennon with The Walls and Bridges. Ringo put out Goodnight Vienna. Paul didn't put out an album, but he put out the best single of all of them, which was Junior's Farm. My absolute favorite Wings song. It was the introduction of Jimmy McCulloch. Another tragic case after he left Wings in 78, 77, 78. A year or so later, he was found dead in his home. Heart failure. He had his demon, so God knows what it was. But anyway, 74 was a pretty cool year. It was a year I went to kindergarten. But yeah, it's there's a ton of stuff that could have made the list. I didn't want to make this too long. We're already at 17 minutes now. So I'm going to wrap this one up because we got 1975 all ready to go. Just got to pull the records and get my notes together about what I want to talk about. But if you get a chance, give it a like, a subscribe, tell a friend. Really would like to get the station, the channel a little more off the ground. And get some activity, get some comments. If there's some records that you like from 74 that aren't here, let's talk about them. Put them down in the comments. Until the next one, we'll see you on the B-side.